without further ado, it's my pleasure to start presenting the speakers. Like I said, we have a great lineup. Our first speaker is Dr. Christopher Peters. Dr. Peters is a professor in pediatrics and board certified in child and adolescent psychiatrist at the University of Louisville School of Medicine. He's the medical director for Norton Children's Behavioral and Mental Health Clinic, and he's going to talk today on the youth development in sport. So without further ado, Dr. Peters.
Well, they pick a psychiatrist to start the day. I assume because March Madness has become March Sadness for all of us, or a lot of us anyway. Tough time of year for men's basketball anyway. So let's get started. Sports and youth is an area that I've dedicated a lot of my career to. I don't really have any conflicts of interest in this talk today. I was an athlete back in high school and college, like I presume many of you. And those who have chosen to be part of helping athletes be at their best or recover or get back in the game had their start, I would guess, in the participation in athletics when they were younger. We're going to kind of set the stage as why I believe participation in athletics is important for our young people into their adulthood. We'll review the benefits, particularly from a psychological perspective, of youth and athletic participation. And we'll talk about some of the risks that come with that as well. And then, while we're not all mental health providers in the classic sense, I would propose to you that because you have so much contact with young people, young athletes, and professionals, that every contact matters. All right, so we're going to approach this from a developmental perspective. And so if you ask kids why they play sports, what do you think they say? Well, that's true. They might not say anything, but some of them will say to have fun, right? The idea of getting out, doing something with your friends, participating in a group. The number one reason young people seek to play sports is to have fun. They also had some other ideas around doing something I'm good at, right? Getting better, to stay in shape. It wasn't lost on them that there were physical benefits of being active, and to improve in something, right? To develop some sense of competence with a new skill. So what makes sports fun? That's the next question, right? So we get in it to have fun. Well, what about it makes it fun? And so when you ask that question, it sort of comes around to the participation, trying my best, giving my effort. Also how they're treated, right? So they're very aware of how the adults in the area of coaching and the parents' involvement, how that impacts them and what it can do to make things more fun or less fun. They like to play. So young people want to participate and not just watch, and they like when they get along with their teammates, another big one. So if you ask them to rank these, you see the top 5 list of what makes it fun. Number 48 is actually winning for the young people. They're a little less concerned about that. Now that comes up as you get older and you get more competitive and certainly want to do well. There's a survey out through Changing the Game, and they were kind of trying to figure out why kids quit sports, because we do lose a lot of youth from sports participation as they age up. And they wanted to kind of see what kind of coach seemed to enhance longer participation for young people. And so respect and encouragement, positive role model, clear in the communication piece, right? It becomes very important. Knowledge of the sport and someone who listens. So these are pretty basic human interaction points, right? There's nothing too dramatic about it. So why am I here? Why am I trying to sell this idea that sports participation is so important? So I start with setting the stage of what is going on in today's world, right? So we think about our youth. We're in a bit of a mental health crisis, somewhat related to coming out of the pandemic. We've got gun violence that we all are aware of is problematic in our country. We have the impact now of a couple of decades of social media and its impact. And some of that has not been real positive for the mental health, certainly of young people. We still have suicide as the second leading cause of death for the younger age group, not to mention the cultural struggles with social justice issues and our substance abuse epidemic. So this is the context, right? This is where we are. If you look at the CDC Youth Behavior Risk Survey, you can see areas when we talk about youth depression, when we talk about have you thought about suicide, have you made a plan to kill yourself in the last 12 months, we're heading in the wrong direction as highlighted by the stop signs there on those questions. We now know in a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine that gun violence has now passed all other causes for death in youth. So, what are things we can do to try to impact and change the course of things for our young people? So the government would like to have sports participation in around the 60% range. That's their goal by 2030, to have 60% of all youth participate in sports. And when I say participate, I really mean a continual participation, that you develop a love of sport that goes into adulthood like it has for many of us. If you look at the current numbers, and really I'd have you look at what's termed as core participation. Those are people who are regularly participating. The other numbers are people who've participated once in the last year or so. So the core numbers are about 35% of kids. So we're about halfway where you want to be. Okay, so how do we make that change? And we know the pandemic, which is what this slide indicates and a couple others, has sort of decreased participation, which is not surprising given the challenges of living with a pandemic at the time. If you look at across the nation, the red indicates less than 50% of kids participating in sports. The light blue, somewhere in the 50 to 60 range. And so there's a few states that have that 60% mark, which is ultimately the goal. And very few sports are immune to this sort of decline. Mostly team sports suffered the most. There were a few sports that actually increased participation. And I think it's because it was easier to social distance. So you had things like golf and tennis that made a little bit of a rise, but a lot of the other things have suffered in the sense of that and haven't quite recovered yet from what they lost there. So let's take a developmental perspective of participating in sports. We know that as we develop, there's our genetics and then the world around us interplay with that. And we've come a long way to know it's nature and nurture, not one or the other. We know it's genetics and epigenetics. We know that that is the key. So context of where we grow up and how we grow up and all those interactions matter. We'll break this down into sort of a mind-body-spirit approach, sort of a psychological mind approach, a physical approach, and then sort of outside of that. All right, so let's start with kind of the cognitive elements. We know that one of the possibilities of psychological benefit from sports participation is developing mental toughness. So when you talk to sports performance people, there's this aspect of mental toughness coming out of it. Well, what is that really? It's sort of a resilience you can gain through adversity, right, to be able to push through, get to the other side of a challenge, and develop more competence. And self-confidence and confidence building is a big part of youth development, right? We want to have those successes enough where we end up having a true sense of our abilities to manage what life throws at you. And I think sports and the venue of sports becomes a nice practice zone for that and to develop that aspect. You can perform under pressure, you can get pushed beyond what would be normally what you think you could do within team settings particularly. And it teaches kind of delayed gratification in a lot of ways if you're participating in a sport, trying to get to a goal of high performance. Dr. Dweck out of Stanford has written a book called Mindset that probably is familiar to a lot of you in terms of breaking down mindset into sort of two categories. One is what she called a fixed mindset, and the other is called a growth mindset. And so the fixed mindset person really does see failure as a definition of themselves, that failure defines them in some way, that they are sort of set in stone, and that each sort of thing they're doing becomes either opportunity to succeed or fail, and that impacts how they see themselves. The growth mindset person tends to look at failure's opportunity, way to grow and learn, even though they didn't perform at the level they wanted. It is opportunity to grow and learn. So this is for us, and then working with athletes to help shape towards growth mindset versus fixed mindset. The sports becomes opportunity to play that out. I guess the other comment, perfectionism, wanting to do your best, kinds of strategies can fall into the fixed mindset, right? If I'm not perfect, then everything else is failure. This has all been a waste of time. What am I doing? So you can get into the very black and white thinking of this. Growth mindset allows you to appreciate the gray and to be able to use those opportunities again to grow, develop, learn. The physical benefits of exercise, everyone's well aware of this. Every system's impacted in a favorable way, potentially, as long as we avoid injuries and things like that. And so I won't spend much about that other to come back when we talk about risks. The other benefit I think that is underappreciated is when we talk about young people developing emotional regulation, right? The ability to manage their intense emotions, be it anger, frustration, sadness, that sports allows a venue for that, because we all know you experience a lot of emotion through the ups and downs of sports participation, and also as a fan, but mainly as a participant. And that really allows a venue to practice for young people managing those emotions. We know that through multiple studies, you can augment treatment for things like depression, severe mental illness, even schizophrenia, ADHD, with exercise, and show greater benefits to the treatment interventions. In a survey of young people, these were middle schoolers who were asked about their participation in sports and the value to them. Some of them were very clear how it helped in terms of some of their mental health. The first young person talking about how it helped their anxiety when they were participating in sports. They felt less anxious. One had a better sleep at night, as their comments. And even one noted they felt better when they were participating and felt worse when they got cut by the team. So there is the up and down, and again, those opportunities to learn how to manage through disappointment and frustration. Another benefit is teamwork, learning to work with others. And a lot of times you can be on a very diverse team, right? People that aren't like you, and learn how to really respect and tolerate other people's other views because you have a common goal, and we'll say more about that in a minute. There's lessons in morality and fairness built into competition, and certainly you can access leadership skills if you're so inclined to being part of a team. Literature's played out pretty consistently that sports participation, when you look at teens, and cuts down in delinquencies, teenage pregnancy, substance use overall. So there again, this value of sports participation. If we keep more kids engaged, right, you're gonna have a lot of value outside of that. So let me kind of set up a video clip of a movie called Gridiron Gang. It's a little dated, but it was about a LA County Juvenile Center counselor who himself had played football growing up and had the idea that sports was critical in his own development. So he wanted to start sports activities within the detention center. And so they started with basketball and eventually got to football. So this movie clip is sort of about that experience where The Rock plays Sean Porter, and they have these teammates now who were on rival gangs, right? And outside of the detention center, they would have been at war with each other. But this instance, in a Hollywood kind of way, shows how that sort of unhealthy bond was broken.
8-8. 8-8 for life, homie. Appreciate it. What up, 9-5?
Get up off.
What up, bitch? You be dead for that, nigga.
You a bluff. You ain't got nothing.
Don't let me catch you in the street. I got this. I know that. Take that, nigga. Go to sleep. Go to sleep.
So, the man with the gun and the man who stopped him from shooting and killing the teammate were in the same gang. The man who was shot and survived was a rival gang member to those two. So the point being, their participation within the team dynamic changed what had been a recidivistic struggle for people working with youth in a high level of gang involvement in LA County back in the late 80s, early 90s. So again, it's sort of an example of the power maybe that sports can have in terms of development and seeing things differently through those experiences. So those are the values. Let's talk about some of the risks. Injuries, well, you got to play to have a higher risk of injury, typically. But people do get hurt, and a lot of us help them to return after they get injured so they can keep playing. Thankfully, in youth, maybe up to a half or so get injured in any given season, and 2/3 of those are minor injuries, get right back at it due to the guidance and help for a lot of you give them. There are challenges as we learn more and more about some injuries with concussions and how we manage those. If you go back 15 years to now, we manage them differently, right? It's more active rehab now versus rest and don't do anything till you're symptom-free. And so all our work evolves and helps people recover and be more active. We know the risk of overtraining syndromes, and sometimes that looks depressive in nature, and you got to try to tease that out. We also know that there has been a trend of earlier specialization for young athletes to pick a sport, play it year-round, and really develop that skill set. And the question is whether that's the healthiest approach. Does it put them more at risk for injuries and those kind of things? There is something called a unidimensional identity risk for young people who then kind of dive into that one sport early on, and that's kind of all they do. And the idea is, I sweat, therefore I am, right? I am a basketball player. Well, tell me more about yourself. Well, that's what I do. There's nothing more. And that's fine as long as nothing goes wrong, I guess. But if you have an injury or they're not able to play or whatever, there can be a real crisis. So, the healthier approach, what we try to help people do is create a broader sense of themselves within their sport so that is protective in case something happens or they aren't able to play. Byproduct, again, it can affect development if you specialize too early or you hone your identity within that sport to be really the only thing about yourself. So I treated a 19-year-old who was a college athlete who really was struggling with a depression and really dread for sport, right? This person had gotten to the point really being burned out, but could not make the decision, at least in a healthy way, to step away from the sport. There was too much of her identity wrapped in the family's identity and even her community from where she was. Turns out she also had an injury that lingered, right? You think it was improving, it just couldn't quite get over the hump to return to play. And partly a lot of that struggle was psychological in nature, right? So again, it speaks to that risk that some people run into if they don't have the broader sense of a self and it's all wrapped up in the athletic identity. So that is certainly a risk zone. Negative impacts on confidence can occur if those around you are approaching the sport in an unhealthy fashion, right? So if you have a destructive or abusive coach, someone who's always kind of tearing you down and there's no build up there, solely focused on outcomes and winning, right? There's nothing wrong with focusing on that. That's the goal, right? We're all competitive. We want to do our best. We want to win as a team. But again, if you look at successful people, if you talk to LeBron James, he's not talking about the winning as much as the process, the journey over the destination. And so that's the growth mindset approach. And if we can get all our coaches and parents who are raising young athletes to have that growth mindset approach as opposed to outcome focused, then I think we're onto something that can really be helpful generations to come. Other risks include what I'll call sort of moral regression or the free pass. And so these are the athletes who are very talented and may slip through the cracks for accountability, right? So if they don't have the grades, but hey, we need them to play anyway, they sort of learn that maybe they're above some of the rules. And that can unfortunately hurt them in their development because they can come out quite entitled and struggle when accountability finally hits them. Because this is a system that a lot of times is run by adults, there is the risk of exploitation, right? There's a term called achievement by proxy, where either the parent or adult around the young athlete exploits the child in a way to fuel their own ego, right? So that they live through vicariously the child, and that becomes a slippery slope for sure. And again, some of this falls into that early specialization. The parents have goals and dreams for kids, as we all do. If you have kids, you want them to do well. My goals and dreams for my kids may not be their goals and dreams. And so you have to kind of wrestle with that and make peace with that. I'll show a clip now from it's kind of a intro to a documentary that HBO had about sort of parenting and athletes.
Can you be any stupider? How dumb! God damn it, just hit the ball close to the hole. Why do you do that?
The documentary that you're going to see in the first episode of State of Play is called Trophy Kids, and it's a documentary that's about overparenting in youth sports.
That's why I asked you if you look confused. You got that stupid daze in your eyes again.
Join the game mentally.
Parents are at times out of control. They're very intense.
You have me driving back and forth from this school for you to go out and do absolutely nothing.
There's clearly a vicarious element to the relationship with them and their kids.
What if I didn't do everything I could to help them realize their dreams?
I think most parents who I know kind of, quickly sort of say, well, thank God I'm not them. But I can kind of relate to some of the things they're saying, particularly with the issue of effort in sports. I think most of us are probably willing to say we're not going to freak out over a loss quite as easily as we might freak out over a complete lack of effort.
I just see so much more in you, man. That's all.
And I think that something we're able to discuss with Dr. Lauer and Todd is the idea of effort and how do you gauge an effort and how, as a parent, can you impact or not impact your child's ability to demonstrate effort on the field. And so that's something that I relate to personally.
So, and Todd Marinovich was one of the discussants there, and for those of us old enough, he was a very talented quarterback and did make it to the NFL, but it all kind of fell apart for him. His story really started in childhood, right? That his dad really trained him from day one to be this elite level athlete. And again, it was early specialization. Everything was managed from training, nutrition, from the get-go. His dad, I can't remember his role, but worked at the professional level as maybe strength and conditioning or something along those lines, if I recall right. And again, Todd would tell you that sort of unidimensional identity, and then when things didn't go well, created a crisis in his life, and that was his role there, sort of sharing his story. The other aspect here on this slide, and I don't need to, we could talk all day about the trauma that occurs or can occur in the sport role, because we have, again, an area where adults are in charge of these young people for long periods of time, over time, and that puts up a vulnerability risk for sure. And so Dr. Nassar is the sort of prime, terrible example of folks in our field who took advantage of young athletes, leading to the need for these young, courageous women to finally stand up together and speak their truth and make changes, hopefully for the better. And things like Safe Sport have come out of that in terms of training us all better to be not bystanders, but more active participants. Repetition of interpersonal difficulties. So there are times where I've worked with athletes who seem to be struggling with the coach or team level, but it seems to be dynamically drawn from their own developmental experiences, so almost replaying things that had been problems early on and just continue to play out in a dynamic way, partly because of their lack of awareness of that occurring. So working with young people to connect those dots, because we all bring our baggage into the next phase of development experience, we have to be aware of what that baggage means and how that can impact our perceptions and behaviors the next phase of our lives. All right, let's take a deep breath, right? What can we do? Right, we have an opportunity to continue to support young athletes to stay with their participation. Athletics benefits occurs when there is consistency and continuance of that participation. It's not you go out and play one game, one season, and you get all the benefits. We want to create a love of the sport, right? A love of participation, a love of being active, so that it permeates through development, and you want to stay active even as an adult. That's when we know we're getting somewhere. We know that if you look at, there's about a 30% dropout rate each year from sports for young people. By adolescence, 70% of youth have dropped out of sports. So again, there's a lot of room to grow here. That comment we made earlier about kids just want to play, right? Now, there may be levels of competition that some people aren't quite up for, but we should do better at giving levels of opportunity, right? If you asked 100 kids, would you rather sit on a winning team or play on a losing team? Up to 90% say I'd rather play. All right? We just want to play, man. All right. So all points of contact matter, and that's where I think all of us in here can think of ourselves as mental health promoting individuals, mental health prevention specialists, right? Dr. Hupp, orthopedic surgeon, but his contacts with young athletes, working on prevention strategies, working on recovery strategies, he's got trust, he's got alliance. He can ask about other aspects, right? How they're doing emotionally, how they're doing mentally, are they enjoying their sport, what they might do differently. He has regular contact with coaches, trainers, as all of you do. A lot of you trainers have contact with coaches. And over time, again, sharing these beneficial things in a way that help them maybe see things differently becomes, I think, a valuable area for our interaction with the whole sports teams. So if we pay attention and we see somebody struggling, we ask the questions. We all probably know at some level the emergency action plans if we're school related in some way in what we do, right? If somebody collapses, what are you going to do? If somebody has a head injury, what are you going to do? So then what's the mental health component of that? What do you do if you see an athlete struggling who's not showing up, whose grades have dropped? You know, what's the steps for that? And if you ask, hey, are you doing okay? No, I'm not. Are you thinking about scary things like killing yourself? Yes, I am. Then what's the action plan there, right? So again, those are things we can help as the healthcare team in terms of helping schools and coaches have more comfort and confidence in addressing that, just like they would an injury if something occurred in practice. And there's a variety of ways we can help train others, right? Simple things we can do, the mental health first aid training, QPR training, things like that, that just create a comfort of being able to talk to people who you think might be struggling. We want to keep kids engaged. That's the whole point. If you play a year and decide sports isn't for you, that's okay, and there are other things you can do, but we want them to be involved in something. But we don't want them to leave sport because why? If you ask them, why did you leave? It wasn't fun anymore. Number one answer. So how do we keep it at least enjoyable? We're going to be able to show and model and teach healthy boundaries as our role with these teams. And if you work within school systems, you're going to be able to build that support team within the school, hopefully. All right, so those are a lot of the concepts there I just covered. The other thing I'll pass on is sort of a thought about age and development and when you should kind of think about specialization versus diversification. So I'm going to propose to you that early diversification of sports participation is the way to go, that's healthier. So let kids play multiple things, right? Try different sports, see what they like, see what they're naturally more talented in, see if they even like this kind of stuff. Are they more into arts, music, and want to do those kind of things versus inclined to participate and stay in something like sports? And so we're going to make sure we, did I pass them up? I think I hit it wrong there. So we want to make sure up to maybe that tween age, diversification. Middle school on up, if someone has a real inclination towards a sport, then I think specialization makes more sense, right? But a lot of times we're specializing, or the families think, man, we got to start early and stay here to give them a chance to have success. And that really hasn't shown out. If you look at studies where some countries, they'll pick kids who have certain talents, and they'll put them in kind of these specialized schools to create athletes, essentially. And if you take doping out, there's really no added benefit when you compare early specialization factories and kids who had a more diverse upbringing with multiple sports, did different things, took breaks, etc. And then along about middle school on up, if you want to specialize and do more club kinds of things, I think the risk goes down. But again, early specialization, year-round playing, those definitely are risks for overuse injuries. You guys know that far more than I do. But can we help educate that that's not the only way you can do things and still be quite successful? All right. There we go. So we need to listen to the kids, know our developmental approach. I think you focus on skills and mastery as long as you can. That really needs to be the focus. Focus on the journey, not the destination, right? All the cool little buzz statements that are hanging in locker rooms, whatever, there is some truth to some of those. And as adults, particularly if you're a parent, you know, they may not have the same dream as you, right? And so being able to respect that and support them in whatever they find their passions to be in. I think we have an opportunity as the health providers to show levels of leadership to those who are working with the kids. And trainers really, because you're in the day-to-day, sort of the front line. And I think you have a great opportunity to impact the coaching level in a way to sort of push some of these healthy ideas. And you can do it subtly, right, over time, and educate and see if those can help some coaches who may struggle with some of these concepts to incorporate them more. All right, so I propose that an active person has a more active brain that helps us in schools. Getting rid of PE and activity, less helpful for schools. That's my little plug for all of us to advocate to keep things in schools that help kids be active and do things as part of their educational experience. All right, so I'll stop there. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you all today.